August is a sweet corn harvest month in Ohio. The hot sun was beating down on my grandfather's farm in Montgomery County. It was that time of summer when my family and my cousins all returned to the family farm to help my grandfather with the harvest. I had always enjoyed this time on the farm. I had been drawn to the rolling hills and the rustling cornfields. As a 7-year-old, I didn't have an active role in harvesting. Still, I often rode shotgun on the grain tractor or sometimes with my grandfather himself on the harvester. I loved being on the farm. Let me date myself here. I'm now 92 years old, and this event happened a long time ago. The farm no longer exists. Children's Hospital sits about where the fields were. The old farmhouse is still in existence out on Huffman Avenue, and my memory of meeting Clemens Folke is still very alive. This encounter changed everything I knew about the world as a 7-year-old and forever opened my eyes to a world where spirits exist. I had spent the morning playing in the barn and doing what I could to be helpful to Grandfather. He gave me a rake and asked if I could clean the pens where the pigs are usually kept at night. They were in the harvested field eating the fodder left by the harvester, so it was just me in the barn alone. Or so I thought. Then I heard a voice. It was friendly. When I looked up from raking a pile of straw and pig manure, a boy about my age stood. "I'll help ya," he shouted, and quick as lightning grabbed a shovel and shoveled as I raked the muck. We worked side by side as a team for several hours. We didn't speak much, we just worked. As we worked, the sky gradually shifted to hues of orange and pink, signaling the approach of twilight. We looked at each other, sweating profusely, proud of the work we had completed. The barn was swept clean. I knew my grandfather would be proud of Clemens and my hard work. His name was Clemens, but he said everyone called him Clemmy. We were both the same age, 7. I told Clemmy I'd be 8 on September 28th. He said he was always 7. At 7, you can play all day and swim in the pond when you get hot. "Let's go swimming in the pond," he exclaimed. "Last one in is the rotten egg." We ran as fast as we could through the still standing corn. A half-mile away, we could hear Grandfather's harvester still finishing the day. The sun had already set. Darkness was falling fast, and a waning gibbous moon was already on the horizon when we dove into the farm pond. Clemens and I swam and laughed. We soon cooled down, and I said I needed to get back to the house for dinner. Clemens said, "Come again and let's play. This pond is my favorite place on earth, and I spend all my time here." We waved goodbye, and I darted off through the field to the farmhouse. When I burst into the door, Grandfather and the rest of the family were already at the table, with a pile of silver queen corn steaming on a huge platter. "Where have you been, young man, coming in all wet?" asked my grandmother. I said, "I was swimming in the pond with Clemmy." "With whom?" my grandfather with open eyes inquired. "With Clemens. He's my new friend. He says everyone calls him Clemmy, though. We're the same age. He is lots of fun and a big help. We cleaned the whole barn together." "And you went swimming in the pond with Clemens?" "Yes, we were so hot and dirty from cleaning the barn, he suggested we go there. He said he's always there and it's his favorite place to play. I thought it would be okay since I didn't go alone. I know the rules. Never go swimming alone, Grandpa." "Have you ever heard the name Clemens before this day, Elmer?" Grandfather asked with a very bewildered look on his face. I said, "No. Who is he, Grandpa?" And so my grandfather told everyone seated at the table, including me, the story of Clemens Folke. He was born in this house in 1880. He was my older brother. I called him Clemmy. We did everything together. I tagged along with him everywhere. In August of 1888, Clemen was 7 years, 11 months, and 27 days old when we cleaned the barn, which was new at the time. I was only 5.5, so I didn't help very much, but I was with Clemmy. When we finished the chore, Clemens yelled to me, "Let's go swimming. The last one in is a rotten egg." I ran after him, having a hard time keeping up. He darted through the cornfield where our father was harvesting the sweet corn. It was August 9th, 1888. I'll never forget that day. I was too young to save my brother. I could only cry and scream as I saw Clemmy floating in the pond. It was later determined that he had dove headfirst into the pond and struck the bottom, breaking his neck. There was nothing I could do. I see Clemens around the pond laughing and playing every day I'm in that field, Elmer. You were the only other person who has seen him. That is my story of Clemens Folke. The pond is no longer there, but I still go to that location and we talk. Spirits are real. When you connect with one, they are always with you. I never believed in ghosts. I dismissed them as Halloween tales intended to scare children. But standing in my deceased great-uncle's home, I could no longer cling to my denial. I inherited my great-uncle's farm in Mount Airy, North Carolina when I was 23. He was a recluse who had never married. At his death, he was pretty old, and the house had long ago fallen into disrepair. I had met Uncle Thomas as a child, but knew nothing about him except some crazy stories my mother talked about him. I was shocked when I learned he had left his farm to me. I received a letter from Uncle Gerald Schaefer along with a deed to the property. It was rather cryptic and short, more of a warning than advice. Take care of this house. It holds many secrets. Disregarding the strange warning, I moved in, intending to renovate the place and flip it for a nice profit. I set up my things in the back bedroom, thinking of beginning renovations in the morning. On my first night in the house, the wind was whipping down from the Blue Ridge with such force it made the old house virtually howl with creaks and moans, the agony of an old man whose bones all hurt from age. It was spooky lying in bed listening to the old place groan. I tried to ignore the eerie sounds, but as I stared at the ceiling, I could see it heaving like a smoker taking labored breaths. The wallpaper expanded and contracted like the lungs of a smoker. After midnight, I slipped into a trance-like sleep, asleep but awake. I don't know how else to explain it. In this trance-like sleep, I heard the faintest whisper, as if someone was speaking into my ear. I sat bolt upright, straining to hear what the voice was saying. Or was this just the wind playing mind games with me? It was a tumultuous sleep, but morning finally came and the wind relented. I returned to the world, stepping out of my trance as I walked down the hall to the decrepit bathroom, wondering where I should start to repair this wreck of a house. After my cold water shower, the water heater was faulty due to a lack of maintenance. I walked through the house collecting bag loads of old clothes, torn sheets, and moth-eaten blankets, all for Goodwill or the dump. I made separate piles in the living room. As I rummaged through the closets, I found a leather briefcase. It was pretty old and moldy. I was going to toss it out, but I thought I'd better go through it first. I pried open the lock with a screwdriver. Inside were a bunch of old photos, a brochure for a metal barn, and a title for a Buick, which I surmised was the rusted car in the garage. But most intriguing was a notebook wrapped in flannel cloth. The first entry, in spidery script, was dated a century ago. It was neatly written and precise in its language, but unease crept into me as I read, "Trust no one. They are watching." I put the notebook aside and cleared the house of my great-uncle's rubbish. That night, I again lay in bed. Again, I fell into that trance-like state of consciousness. I couldn't move. In my head, I could again hear the whisper and feel its motion in the room. There were no footsteps, but I could feel that someone or something was walking through the house. The following day, I did some research at the Historical Society to see if they had any history of Schaefer's farm. They did, in fact, have some lore recorded in a book written a century before about Mount Airy and some of the early farmers of the area. Schaefer's farm was originally owned by an early settler named Thomas Hawthorne. The article described him as wealthy because he grew tobacco, which he sold in Winston-Salem. But despite his wealth, he was reclusive and eccentric. It was rumored that he was a serial killer because many of the itinerant laborers who passed through Mount Airy were never seen again after working on Hawthorne's farm. Whether they just continued into the mountains on their journey or if their journey ended at the farm was only speculation. As for Thomas himself, he ended tragically. Some folks said he probably was murdered by the ghosts of the farmhands he had killed. However, the official report was that Thomas had died accidentally of suffocation after a fall with a rope around his neck. He was found in the entry of his home, dangling from a rope tied to the second-floor railing. I got the briefcase out again and pulled out the photographs. As I analyzed them, I saw a group of men standing in front of the house, Thomas Hawthorne among them. He looked very uneasy, and the men around him looked very angry. That night, I couldn't sleep. The whisperer was more insistent. I got up and wandered the house, hoping to understand everything. Standing in the entry hall, I looked up and felt a cold chill. Then, Thomas Hawthorne stood in front of me. He was translucent, but I saw him as clear as day. He looked at me and whispered, "Welcome to my home," then vanished. I still live in the house. It's been 30 years now. I seldom go out. I just needed to tell my story. You don't have to believe it, but I hear Thomas Hawthorne's whispers every night, and we communicate. Ghosts are real. My grandfather recounted this ghostly war story to me when I was a child. My grandfather said this occurred when he was a boy in Dayton, Ohio. He was born in June 1892, and he said this happened to him when he was 9 or 10, so I'm guessing it was around 1901 or 1902 at the time of the incident of the Civil War ghost. My grandfather was born on Tate's Hill. His family's farmhouse was already old, having been built in the 1830s. Tate's Hill was just east of Dayton, near where Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is today. During the Civil War, Tate's Hill was used as a training ground for Union soldiers. Civil War-era coins and buttons are still unearthed in the vicinity by metal detector searchers. This is to give you an idea of where this encounter occurred. As my grandfather recounted, he found the body of a 55-year-old vagrant on the back acreage of the farm. The vagrant was known to his father, who said he was a private who served in the Union Army during the Civil War. He spent a winter on Tate's Hill during his training and subsequent fighting in the Battle of the Wilderness in Virginia. And then, 37 years after the Civil War, he returned to Tate's Hill for whatever strange reason in his head. My great-grandfather surmised he wasn't mentally stable, but harmless, so he was left to forage and camp in the nearby woods. Well, my grandfather found on the vagrant's body a diary that was old and worn. He put it into his pocket and went back to the house to inform his father that the old vagrant who lived in the woods was dead in the back field. His father got a shovel from the shed and they went back to the field. They dug a grave and, with a few kind words, covered the deceased man with the soil. No marker was left. Grandfather's father said to let him rest as he lived without notice. Later that night, my grandfather opened the diary and read, "My name is Samuel Porter. I write this May 8th, 1864, in Spotsylvania, Virginia, where I fight with the Army of the Potomac under General Ulysses Grant. Yesterday, we had a formidable battle. I don't know how many have been killed, but I can tell you it is a very significant number. I am one of them. I don't see how this is possible as I write my recollections, but I am dead, and I see from my body still. I can't explain. My regiment had been ordered to hold our position, and we were exposed to rebel muskets and cannons. We fired our guns and reloaded as fast as we could. I could hear the musket balls striking my comrades and hear them fall dead along the line. Then I heard a tremendous explosion and felt the pressure lift me, and all went black. And here I am now in the woods, sitting among the torn bodies of my regiment, writing this recount so that someone may find and know what happened to me. So, as my grandfather recounted, the vagrant was a ghost and not a person wandering the earth. He had returned to Tate's Hill to find peace where he had last known it. Years later, my grandfather, as a young man, dug in the unmarked grave with the thought of exhuming the soldier and giving him a proper burial at the Veterans Cemetery on West 3rd Street. But when he dug, he found nothing in the grave. No bones, clothing, or any evidence that the man had been buried there. This was conclusive evidence that a vagrant Civil War soldier never wandered Tate's Hill. Grandfather truly had encountered a ghost, and he was convinced of that until the day he died.
Subscribe.